Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian in Congress right now, represents a district that is mostly Muslim, mostly black in Michigan. She had this. You have the clip ready, Jonah? Just tell me. Okay, this is what she has said today.
Everyone, it's Rashida. I was proud today to walk in and pull a Democratic ballot and vote uncommitted. We must protect our democracy. We must make sure that our government is about us, about the people. When 74% of Democrats in Michigan support a ceasefire, yet President Biden is not hearing us. This is the way we can use our democracy to say, listen to Michigan. Listen to the families right now that have been directly impacted, but also listen to the majority of Americans who are saying enough. No more wars. No more using our dollars to fund a genocide. No more. So please, take your family members. Use our democratic process to speak up about your core values, where you want to see our country go. I know taking my first time voter, my 18-year-old son, to the polls today was so incredibly empowering too, and he felt it. And I told him, you right now did it for not only Sidra and Rima, which those images have never left any of us, but you also did it to protect our democracy.
How? So a sitting congresswoman who's a Democrat didn't vote for Joe Biden. She voted uncommitted today, early voting in Michigan. Took her son, and then got on social media
and encourage thousands of other people to do it over the course of
yeah,
the last.
which people already want to. And so I don't know, how does this protect our democracy when you are literally teeing it up, because those folk on the other side, and it's right and wrong, not left and right. We're not talking politically right now. They're voting for Trump.
They're voting for Trump. And, look, I'm not a Biden stan, but I recognize that even in a primary, actions that do not support Biden as the Democratic nominee are effectively Biden erosion and Trump supporting. I want to see Joe Biden win this election. I am not the biggest Joe Biden fan, and you don't have to be animated by Joe Biden, but you should be excited about the prospect of voting against the interests of somebody who says, y'all Negroes like me because I got indicted 91 times. What's up? Y'all like me, and I'm going to sell you these $400 sneakers because that's what y'all do. And I love the blacks. And, this is something that would have gotten Orville Faubus and Lester Maddox and Bull Connor. They would have been canceled for some of the things that Donald Trump is objectively saying out loud now, and the people who would be in his administration are encouraging him to say and are amplifying, right? So I don't want to see him become president. Rashida Tlaib, and listen, I have gotten all of the vitriol. I started on Fox News 6 years ago, and I've got death threats, bomb threats, all that jazz, which is why I eventually stopped. I've gotten every bit as ugly messages from the left for saying that I disagree with Rashida Tlaib's stance here. Not saying I support the genocide, of course not, but saying I disagree with her stance in this because she has representative responsibilities to Black people in the city of Detroit. And the way that congressional politics works in Washington, D.C., the unfortunate reality of this ugly horse trading we do up here, right down the road, is that not being in step with the Democratic president has ramifications for the people you serve in your Black hometown. I understand you have a broad Palestinian community and constituency, and you should stand up for them. But there will absolutely, very likely, be ramifications, most likely seen in the appropriations process, that will hurt Black people in the city of Detroit. And the reality is that Black people support a ceasefire too. But you are elected to represent Palestinian interests around the world, but you were elected by the Detroit Congressional District, in which I know a whole bunch of competent and capable Black leaders. Maybe I'm buying into it right now because I'm helping pit these two marginalized communities of color against each other. But my larger point here is that as a political operative, I recognize that we are the party of the Big Tent, and we've never had the luxury of being single issue voters. And I'm not willing to sacrifice the interests of my Black folks. What up, though, to everybody in Detroit, in the interest of her taking her binding herself to one specific political tactic that is not really moving the needle, because let's be clear about something. Uncommitted is going to win, and Joe Biden's behaviors are not going to change because Joe Biden loses or gets 20,000 uncommitted votes. What will happen is that Detroit communities fall down that line of seniority and appropriations because their member of Congress is not in good standing, and earmarks are back, and it means something to our communities. Black communities, Black middle class communities were built by earmarks, by savvy members of the Congressional Black Caucus who knew how to use them to bring home appropriations to Black communities.
Don, I cannot believe I am here with you, because you are the perfect person that I have to ask this question of. Now, I will be very honest that it is listening to Urban View that has gotten me to be more politically engaged in the politics, the strict definition of politics in terms of electoral politics. But here's what I believe. I believe that decency is not an American inheritance. And because decency is not an American inheritance, that is the reason why the United States policy is exactly what Joe Biden has been doing to support Israel, even as it commits genocide. So what I want to ask you is this: how, with your political understanding, how do we get to a place where politically engaged citizens, ordinary citizens and voters, not just Tlaib, that all of us are thinking in terms of pressure on the GOP as well? Because what I need to understand is, how do we think that we can push Biden to decency without actually rewarding decency by making sure that Democrats know that the GOP will also get pressure, not just from their own constituency, who their only pressure from them is indecency? How do we get to the point where people who are not engaged politically, that big voter bloc that is the non-voter, and those of us who are on the side of decency, how do we put pressure on the GOP as well, so that, in other words, how is Tlaib's move not doing that? Because that's what I'm trying to get my head around, is that decency isn't automatic. So you have to offer pressure, but you also have to offer pressure that Biden and other Democrats know that they will not simply pay a price without GOP paying a price.
Yeah, unfortunately, in a post-Barack Obama era, the Republican Party has become so insular that they ain't got to listen to none of you Negroes. And they don't believe they do. They are simply not the party of the Big Tent. They are simply not a party who has enough of a critical mass of a diverse population that they don't feel like they have to listen to any of you all. Now, they do know that on a battle of the merit of ideas, they would be electorally vulnerable. They also know that the demographics of this country are not moving in their favor. So what is the response to that? Not to come around on ideas, or not to come around on decency, regardless of social pressure to do so, but to suppress your votes, right? Yeah. To actively engage in voter suppression on the state, local, and federal level. And that is the way they're able to escape accountability, not only electoral accountability, but accountability regarding decency. So I'm not trying to convince Donald Trump of anything. I'm not trying to convince John Thune or Mitch McConnell of anything, because you see, even the good and decent ones with clean Twitter feeds, who don't send mean tweets and have good haircuts, even they have endorsed Donald Trump and fallen in lockstep over the last several months, as he said and done the worst things. I am highly disappointed in Joe Biden, but I'm going to take my highly disappointed black ass to vote for him in the Maryland primary in a couple of weeks. And I'm going to vote for him in November, because the choice is being disappointed in Joe Biden and maintaining democracy, or some form of racist anarchy. That's where we are right now.
Yeah, Project 25 is very clear about that.
Yeah, 2025. This is the primary, though. I would like to have a conversation with Rashida Tlaib, and I'm going to invite her on the show, of course. Will she also do the same, uncommitted, in November? 866-801-8255.
There's no reason to suggest that she wouldn't.
Right.
There's no reason.
Well, I mean, I'm saying you could make a stand in the primary that once it becomes clear what your binary choices are in November, that you wouldn't. But that's a very nuanced conversation that we don't have the capacity to have in this country. Nuance is missed. But to Dr. Mitchell's point, what is our power to make anyone do anything if we just continue to do the same thing? Again, I'm voting in November for the Democrat. I don't care who's on the ticket. I don't care if nobody's on the ticket. I'm still voting that ticket because it's important. It's important. But at some point, and I'm suggesting January of 2025, we get busy coming up with candidates, coming up with a 50 state strategy, coming up with maybe a third party option or a fourth party option or a fifth party, like having more or maybe different wings in the party that we can then apply pressure. You're not going to handpick our nominees. You're not going to give us these 5 horrible people and then we got to pick among the 5 horrible people. But no, we're going to cast the net. We're going to cast the net, cast it wide. But now is not the time leading into this, because all this does is give people who already are inclined to not think and not really care, because we also are selfish, to not vote in November or vote down ballot, which is what I'm hearing a lot of, and that's going to be not good for the Democratic ticket.
One of my dear young brothers around here in DC is a professional track athlete. He's a professional track runner. And he often has to remind me that, hey, man, I do this. This is my career. This is my life. I don't do this on the quadrennial cycle. I don't just run in the Olympics every 4 years. Or I don't just run in Olympic trials every 4 years. There's a race, literally a race, right? Every quarter that I'm prepping for. The Penn Relays is every year. The Drake Relays is every year. Monaco and the various Grand Prix is every year. And I'm training for all those races all the time. Where was you last year at the World Championships? Where was you in 21 and 22? Yeah, it was cool to be with me back in 20 at the Olympics. And yeah, I just booked my family the flights to Paris, light flex, for 24 to see my young homie from St. Louis. Shout out to CJ. But the reality of the matter is that we have to look at this politics in the same way. Where were we training candidates? Where were we getting out messaging? Where were we raising money? Where were we registering voters at 2023 and in 2022? And we will continue to lose, and we will continue to be behind every year if we decide to look at this as a quadrennial presidential exercise. Because the reality of the matter is the time to build the infrastructure of a leftist power base is in the off season. This calendar year, when the clock rolls over to the presidential year, it's time to lock in to maintain big picture democracy. And then next year, 25, 26, 27, it's time to solidify the base. And solidifying the base and building that infrastructure is when you get your leftist ideologues trained for school boards, and when you start to raise the money for them and make sure their compliance is intact and their messaging is intact and their media training is intact and candidate recruitment is intact. So we do this. Those of us who do this all the time, as opposed to those of us who watch MSNBC or Fox News, pick your poison, decide to do this every 4 years. And therein lies the difference. Now, part of that is because of racism. They are so far, you have to go back to the idea. We've only been free for 60 years. And when you've only been free for 60 years, that means they've been free for 200 years. So they have a 140-year head start on putting together the rules, not just the goalposts, but laying the sod, creating the atmosphere, building the stands. The entire infrastructure and plumbing of democracy is something that they've had a 150-year head start on building. So they can mess around with stuff like Supreme Court and judge placement and ballot initiatives while we're still trying to pick compelling candidates, right? And people who can get a good haircut and tie a proper Windsor knot. But if we look at the time we have between presidential elections, that's the time to start building the infrastructure of a progressive base.
But I have to say that all of this also underscores for me the importance of those of us who have not been engaged, staying engaged throughout, and everything that Rachel Bidderkoffer is saying about those who are not voting, that we who vote want to mobilize them and get them to vote. because, you know, I voted in our primary today. Dean Phillips was very much a candidate, and I have seen so many commercials for Dean Phillips since I moved here to Massachusetts in June. And so it was clear to me that getting out to vote was important, and that casting my ballot for Biden was important. But I think that we have to get that largest voting bloc of non-voters engaged, and this is not the election we have to, we just have to.
Yeah, I love talking to Rachel Bidikofer because, and I disagree with her almost 80% of the time, but I love talking to her for a couple of reasons. Number one, I find her to be a capable and worthy adversary, even when we disagree. And number two, she underscores the point every time we talk or I hear her talk that we don't have the luxury of being single issue people. We are the party of the big tent. I remember being so frustrated as a 28, 29-year-old legislator because I had to talk to the guys, the old white man caucus, as we used to call them, from mid-Missouri, who were pro-life. And the only thing that really bound us together was support for organized labor and some semblance of a shred of support for common decency. But they didn't agree with me on anything, and I almost didn't agree with them on anything. But I learned very, very early that we are the party of the big tent, and we, particularly as Black people, don't have the luxury of being single issue voters. I can say that in the negative, we don't have the luxury, but that means we do have the ability to build broad coalitions. And that's what frustrates me when I see Rashida Tlaib, and I support her passion for her people. I support her supporting the ending of this Israeli genocide by any means necessary. But I can also point out as an operative that has costs for our folks in Detroit. All of us have Negro cousins in Detroit. Every single Black person in this country has people in Detroit. Why? Because somebody got a couple more cents, that the CENTS, that they could survive the train ride up north and didn't have to hop off in St. Louis or Chicago. Everybody got people in Detroit, and we should be as concerned about them as she is about the Palestinians. So we have never had the luxury of being single issue voters, and I'm concerned that I don't want them to be hurt, particularly when I know a whole bunch of talented politicians in the city of Detroit who are ready to claim the mantle of leadership and who would not be hurting my people in doing so.